Alright. Hello, my name is Elliott Gregg, and this is my internship reflection presentation. So a little bit about me. My relationship with programming is I've only been programming since I've been here as a computer engineering student, which is about 3 years. Within that time, I've learned Python, C++, and Java. I'm more familiar with Java, but I ended up using a lot more Python actually in my job as an intern, and there's that. I'm not currently looking at going for like a master's even after the internship. I just want to see where things can go with the bachelor's degree. But this is where I worked at Sofwerx. It's in Tampa. Really nice place. They're a nonprofit organization in partnership with the Google Institute, which is also in Tampa and part of the US government, where they receive grants to do their work. And this is their workspace. It's like really open, innovative environment where people just come together, work in groups, and then do their work and then leave. They have the desks for the place actually around the perimeter, and then like these kind of like discussion conference rooms as well. Really open environment, but my relationship with the company currently, well, not currently, but it was a remote internship, so I was hardly here most of the time. Most of the work happened while I was at home, sitting on my desk. And that created its own like unique situations and difficulties to communication. So through my time working there were 3 things that really got me through it, and it was using GitHub, Slack, and Stack Overflow. These are pretty nice. GitHub is very useful, especially in this workplace. We didn't learn too much about it in school, but it's used very extensively within the workplace, being that it's like a version, it just keeps the versions of your programs that you have, and then you can revert back to older forms of it, as well as collaborate with other people, and it just constantly updates to the internet. And then Stack Overflow is pretty nice. We always end up Googling things about programs, but then we always end up going to Stack Overflow to find an answer to our problem that happened a few years ago. And then Slack is where all of our communications happen. We do most of our voice calls through there, as well as putting in code snippets and stuff like that. I think all these are pretty well used within the professional industry. And this is what really got me through for my internship. Learning GitHub was a little bit difficult for the job. Just because uploading large files and like large quantities, it was very like not easy to do unless you're already a paid member. So it was a little bit difficult. But working with my internship supervisor, I was able to work through it, and with the rest of my team. Everyone at the internship majority of them were actually from Puerto Palo, but some of them were from some other places. But no one really had any experience with the job that we were doing as a data scientist. So our first project was actually detecting whether or not an intrusion was occurring in like a home or like a safe house through machine learning. So it wasn't simple at all, and we actually used Python the entire time essentially. But with this, I did this pie chart here because it's like a 70-30 kind of pie chart, and it shows that when it comes to like the data science realm and machine learning, almost 70% of like the work that you're doing is actually just manipulating data, finding it, gathering it, cleaning it into the form that you want it to be in. That way you can work with it best. And the other 30% is the actual fun part where you get to put it through all the algorithms and see the results that come out. So for this project specifically, the first project, it lasted for about a month. And what we had to do is we used physical elements to detect whether or not someone was intruding, or if it was just like a regular person that actually belonged there. So we used motion sensors, cameras, and like notifications of whether or not a door was unlocked, opened, or like a window would open or something like that, that would show malicious behavior. So one of the things that our internship supervisors suggested is like think outside the box, obviously, and then like think step by step with your group members about how you would solve the situation. And first you start thinking, if you're in like a house and you belong there, it's likely that you'd stay in certain rooms for an extended period of time. You wouldn't be rushing back and forth between places, staying off every motion sensor. While someone that doesn't belong there, they might receive like a notification saying that a key wasn't used to get into the door, even though the door was locked, or say the motion sensors go off rapidly in quick succession because someone's running around through the place trying to get what they need and then run out. And then we use that kind of thought process towards guiding our machine learning models to actually detect whether or not someone would be there or not for an intrusion. Here's an example of two of the algorithms that I looked heavily into for this program. K-nearest neighbor, what it does is we just take a bunch of data points, which in our sense would be a delta of time compared to which motion sensor would be going off. And then we plot those onto a graph. We weren't able to make a visual representation of it just because of the way it was done. It wasn't like in a 2D landscape, but you do this, and then you have the center point, and it would cluster the points together. So then as you added more points, the center point would also move to accommodate for the new point that was added. So say we have like this group, this blue group here, and this green group here, and then if we were to only have two different classifications, whether or not it was an intruder or not, we'd have like say underdog here, and then we would count the neighbors closest to it. So say there'd be a bunch of them over here and maybe one over here. So then we classify with the blue group, and then the center point would also move to accommodate for the new point that was just added to it. And with that, we were able to classify it into the two different categories of intrusion or not. And we actually had a success rate of about 80% through our matrices, which we did like a confusion matrix, which would show you about how, if you would have false positives, false negatives, or if the accuracy of the prediction. And the concept of false positives and false negatives is if like it thinks that there's an intruder but there really isn't, or there is an intruder and it thinks that it's perfectly fine and safe. And that can be very like crucial into whether or not you want to take those into consideration when it comes to a more important situation like the second project that we did. The other one that I looked into was logistic regression. It looks pretty similar to a linear regression kind of plot line where you have just a straight line going up into a curve, and then you have the plots, the data points on it as well, showing that how close it is to the predicted values. But here we wanted more of a binary result, so we have here 0 to 1 through probability, and then the bottom here shows the way like where an intruder would be and where an intruder wouldn't be. And then determined by how close it is to the line is the probability that the point is actually what the result is, which would be like the intruder or not. So our project 2 was actually detecting whether or not a gun was within a live video feed through these cameras that they have at Sofwerx. And then when detecting a gun, you'd actually activate physical elements within like the building. So in this particular instance, if it would detect a gun, it would close the outside doors before the person could come in. And then say if that didn't work and they were able to get in, there'd be, the original plan was to have like a mounted flashlight or like a really bright light shine directly into the face of the person holding the gun. That way they'd be blinded and kind of like stunned for a moment. That way you could make your quick escape or detain them. And with that, we used TensorFlow as our primary model source. And all the libraries were find GitHub as well, all the documentation for it. And this was probably the most difficult part of the internship, TensorFlow alone. It's an entirely different thing. And running these machine learning models on like a regular computer normally wasn't an option. You need like strong graphics cards to run through machine learning algorithms. And getting it to run through the GPU was the most difficult part. You could easily just install it to run through the CPU just through the terminal, pretty simple, with like just a few lines in the command prompt. But with this, you actually had to like install several things, and it actually created a very big problem within our groups because not many people were able to do it. So we actually had the remote access into some of the Sofwerx computers on the location to be able to send the model through there so that it could run it through their own GPUs instead of taking several days for it to run on your own computer. So the process of actually doing this was very tedious and difficult. So at first we thought we had to get guns, we had to get pictures of guns and whatnot, and then we had to annotate each picture individually. And the annotation looks something similar to this, to where you have the picture of the item that you want within it as well, normally like in a pretty clear and resolution as well. And then you just draw some boxes around it through a specific program, which is like image annotations. And then after you have about 1,000 of those, you can move on to train the model for it to detect what you want it to detect. So this is also a problem for the industry. Obviously, doing this much tedious work, it requires like little brain power, and it's just completely time consuming. So there's actually services out there that we discovered through the internship supervisor that he discussed, where they outsource these kind of annotations like out to places in like Asia or whatnot, and they'll just annotate the things for you and then send it back to you. That way you don't have to spend hours or days going through literally like hundreds of thousands of files annotating each single image. Our models only used about 100 to 1,000 images, which is like considerably small. And for a production quality program to detect things accurately without many false positives or false negatives, you need it to be around at least well over 1,000, more like around 100,000 in the actual production workplace. But our internship is more towards the proof of concept, which shows that this kind of thing is possible, as opposed to having production quality programs out there that could just be run immediately from the get-go after we finish it. So after we were able to get the annotations done for the images, we actually had a lot of the cameras were mistaking things for things they weren't. So it would detect a lot of like people's faces as guns sometimes, or the occasional, one of the cameras was outside facing the road and a sidewalk before they could enter the building. So whenever a car would come by as well, it would detect the cars as guns as well. So that was the problem. So to fix that, we had to go through a different way of thinking to make it work faster and as well as more accurate. So our internship supervisor helped us with the process of, instead of detecting only guns, you're detecting the person instead. And detecting the person is a lot more easy, and the models for those are already a lot more robust and already on the internet. So when you detect the person, you can then detect their top half of them for a gun. And when it has that gun, it shows either a binary like box of like green or red, showing that this person has a gun or it's just a person. And with that, the process of actually detecting people through the live video stream is a lot simpler, and it ran around more like, I think it was like 12 frames per second as opposed to like 1 frame per second, which is a lot better. And especially when it determines between life and death in someone coming in with a gun. And that's where more of a high-stakes situation of a false positive or false negative would come in. Because if you check that someone doesn't have a gun, but they do have a gun, then it's an extreme problem, because obviously they're there to not do anything good. But if you check that, say, the person does have a gun and they don't, and say instead of a flashlight shining at you, it was just a gun to like exterminate the person, like a threat, then you just killed like an innocent person without a gun, and then that wouldn't be very useful at all. So taking that into consideration, we also thought about that for how the programs would actually work. All right. So this is like an example of what something like this would actually look like. In this particular example, they have, instead of rectangles, boxes and people, it's just actual like outlines of the people, and they're able to keep count of the people that go in and out of the stores and which store they are. And this, it would be pretty similar to what we were doing, and obviously with a different application, more counting people that, counting traffic, as well as foot traffic and like the actual traffic and whether or not people are speeding. Yeah. So, in review of this internship, I really did learn a lot, one of my goals was to improve my communication skills within the workplace, because sometimes when you're working within groups at college, it can be a little dysfunctional. One person ends up doing a lot of the work or all of it, and then things are always like crammed at the very last second. It's just always very difficult, and I never really was able to get that to work correctly unless everybody was already on the same page to begin with. So doing this through a remote internship was really difficult because you didn't have chances to like see people every single day. It was always, you put in a text message through Slack, and then someone might respond like an hour later, maybe 5 minutes later, or maybe the next day. So making sure that what you put in Slack was always like workable. So like if you needed something done if you need someone to do something for you through Slack, you always have to make sure that you left everything there for them to be able to pick it up and do it, just in case that they weren't there to ask you questions or like shift past in the night. That way, just in case both of you guys aren't online at the same time, you guys can still achieve work done, and that's how we use GitHub as well. And also, everything that we did at Sofwerx was open source. So everything that we did was also on GitHub, and my internship supervisor stressed the point of making sure that you can search and like Google everything. That's always like an important thing. He always says, you don't know it, search it up, research it, read like 30 minutes worth of information on the topic. That way you can be able to explain it to someone. And I think that was the most important part, because before this internship, I always kept telling myself, I've learned all these things, but I don't know if I'm actually like career ready, or like I don't think I could do something that someone would pay me to do. And that was always something running through my mind for the last 2 years. And this internship really changed my perspective on that a lot, because really all the stuff that I did, everything I did was through Python, and my Python experience was like my first programming experience. So like it was just like print hello world, or like do a for loop or a while loop. But this turned out to be a lot more complex than that, and just about every single way. And I'm really happy that it turned out that way. This is also, the environment that I was in was also not corporate at all. It was a lot more towards like a startup situation. So our deadlines weren't necessarily loose, but they would change every once in a while. Things that we wanted, or not things we wanted, but things that we needed to do for the program constantly changed throughout the entire time. A lot of the things for our second project was supposed to taking the gun was either scrapped or changed in the way that it would work, because that a client, what the client wants could change. And that really reflected within this. I can't say for sure how it would work in corporate because I haven't been there, but our intern supervisor always stressed also that in this environment, in the startup environment, it's a lot more like this, and that you have to do every single part of it. Like every part of the program, you're involved in, as opposed to like, say in a corporate position, you'll be assigned to specific parts with set deadlines and dates that you need to make sure you accomplish, and you're not responsible for things that are well without your scope. And that's not always true in the startup situation. And that's it. Is there any questions?
Yes. First, what was the software called again?
TensorFlow.
TensorFlow.
So TensorFlow.org is their website that has all their documentation. It's through, I'm pretty sure Google is like the one that made it. And then it's constantly being updated through GitHub as well. And there's loads of documentation. You can actually get object detection, like study models that are already there, like people detecting and things like that, commonplace items that are already in there, so you don't even really have to like think about it. Use that type of code. Yes?
This may be a crazy question, but the way I understood it, TensorFlow, is that a type of machine learning module, or is that just a program?
So it's like the framework for this machine learning that we did. So this machine learning uses the object detection through this. It uses like linear algebra to detect like the pixels and whatnot, and detect whether or not they're similar to the images that you gave them to base it off of. So the more images that you have, they're in like different positions, different shapes, different ways, but all like the same object you're looking for. It'll detect for those specific patterns within like numbers, because they'll enumerate the pixel numbers. Like, so black and white is a lot easier to detect than say color images. because color is a lot more numbers to deal with when it gets enumerated. So when it's not in like a visual format, it's just a bunch of numbers in like a grid format. It's able to detect the similarities and the patterns for it, and then tell you whether or not it's the same thing. Which is why it was a lot easier for me to detect a car as a gun, because it's like, you know, metallic as well. A lot of them are gunmetal shapes, or not shaped, gunmetal colored, and stuff similar to that. Any other questions?
I have a question for the last, the slide for this one.
Yes. This one?
Not that one, the 8, number 8.
Okay.
That one. So how, the difference between how is traffic defined? Is that what went in and out of the store, or
So
in a situation like this?
in a situation like this, it seems like they're using a motion detection thing to detect whether or not the people are there, because people that are like staying still here or here generally weren't detected or have the drawn boxes around them. But the people that are moving, basically, if you have the still image there at first, and then you notice that things are moving in the background, and those things that are moving also happen to look like people, they'll just draw the outline for those people. Did that answer? Or
I'm asking, how is the program different? Well, how is it defining traffic? Like just on, like, so for example, for 21, traffic 10 inside 0, that's who went in and out of the store?
okay, so I'm not actually sure about specifically the traffic
How
part.
it's I'm just curious as to how it's tracking inside versus traffic.
So inside, it would probably detect, it would probably keep count of people that are inside by so it would detect the person that's moving, and then when that person goes through the door and is no longer visible, then it would probably increase the counter. And then the traffic is probably the outside traffic in front of the building itself.
Very good.